All right. My name is Haipei Xu, President of the United Chinese Americans, and I have a great honor to introduce or reintroduce David Lei, our distinguished guest speaker, who has done amazing work for the first lecture or webinar of the UCA series on Chinese American culture, heritage, and identity. That first one was a groundbreaking one with 400 people attending. Now, this one is the second one, and we will have a third, fourth, fifth one going forward for the rest of the year. So please stay tuned to that. And I want to first thank the people that at UCA has worked hard for this, Qi Hong, Xiao, and Professor Liang. We worked as a team to set it up and worked for quite a few days on this. And this is also a joint program by UCA, United Chinese American, and the National Chinese School Associations in US. And last time we had also its president, Xia Ming, and today he will not speak, but really appreciate the Chinese schools' help and being a partner on this very exciting project. Chinese American history, and especially its legal history, I always say that if you boil everything down, boil the whole Chinese American history down, the very, very core of that is actually a legal history of the fighting of Chinese Americans have had throughout the century to protect and fight for their own rights. And in doing so, they have also made America a better country to be. And we should be very proud of that. And I think we should, everybody, spread this around and tell our children, our colleagues, our neighbors that what the Chinese American place in this society is and should be. And that is we should be treated equal, no less and no better than any other Americans. Thanks, David. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Haipei, and I thank you for this platform. Let me share screen first, just a second. Everybody see this? Yeah, I assume it's okay. Yeah, today is actually a bad day to do anything. This is the March 5th, and March 6th is usually the awakening of insects, according to the Chinese solar calendar. And this is Jingze in Mandarin and Jingzik in Cantonese. So when insects awaken, they bring along a lot of these petty people. So today's the day we go Da Xiao Ren, Da Xiu Yan. And I went to 2 temples this morning, but they didn't have that many people there. Oops, my cat wants to sit on me. Anyways, we also did this last Sunday in Marysville. So right now, I've gotten rid of all the petty things that's bothering me. So I'm all set to do this. Okay. I'm trying to get this to move down and it won't go down. Here we go. So China's history with the West, with America, actually formally started, we like to think, from 1784. This is 1 year after the American Revolution. In actually just 6 months, the end of the Revolution, the treaty was signed in Paris in 1783 in September. But by George Washington's birthday in February, the U.S. sent the Empress of China, this ship, to do trading with China. Why did this happen? Well, right after the American Revolution, America was bankrupt, owed a lot of money for the Revolutionary War. And after winning the war against Great Britain, the most powerful country in the world, Great Britain says, okay, you've won, but we're not going to let you trade with any of our colonies. And Britain owned all these colonies around the world except China at the time. So for America, this was the only place they can trade. So they sent the Empress of China there, and it eventually ended up in bringing in opium. Well, the British did that first. The Americans did that later on, and traded opium for the porcelain, the teas, the silks, and so on. But this was so important for the U.S. to revitalize the American economy after the revolution. So many of in fact, most of the old money in the East Coast came from this trade with China. And one of which is John Murray Forbes. He went to China about 1830, and in 4 years, he already made his money and came back to the US. The richest man in the world at that time was Uca, picture here. He was the most powerful of the 13 merchants, ministers that control all trade with China. If you want to do business with China, you had to work through one of these 13 merchants assigned by the emperor to take care of trade and to collect custom taxes. And Uca really liked John Murray Forbes. He was a young man, about 20 years old when he went there. And Uca liked to deal with the Americans instead of the British. The reason is America at the time didn't have a military to back up the merchants, whereas the British, they had a lot of soldiers and Marines in China. And I think the Americans were new at the game and pay higher prices. But for whatever reason, Uca liked John Murray quite a bit. And he was balding when he was very young. He was only 20 years old, but he worked with a lot of older people because they thought he was older because he was balding. Now, when Murray went back to the US about 1834, Uca gave him about $500,000 to $1 million US dollars at the time, equivalent to about $20 to $40 million today, and told John Murray Forbes to invest it for him when he got back to the United States. So when Forbes came back to the US, he invested the money in the railroads around Chicago. And this is before the Transcontinental Railroad. So from a very early on, China and the Chinese were involved with the railroad, but on the finance side, without Uca investing this much money in Forbes, he would not have been able to build up the railroad around Chicago, which was really the transit point for American railroads at the time. So this relationship started very early on. Then we have all these disturbances in China, civil war. We have the Taiping Rebellion. Well, we had the Opium War, which started first in 1839. But this is before the Chinese started to come to California with a gold rush. And if you read most of the books writing about why the Chinese came to California, was the push and pull. The push was China had a lot of disturbances, civil war, famine, and so on. And the pull, of course, was the discovery of gold. but actually the the Opium War didn't affect Guangdong that much, nor the Taiping Rebellion, because that happened, started in Guangxi, and then someone's not muted. Okay, then it went to Nanjing. So Guangdong, especially Seiyup Siyi area and Sanyi area, wasn't that affected. But later on, we had the Red Turban Rebellion at about the same time as the Taiping Rebellion, the earlier years. That affected Guangdong. And then the Hakka Punti War, 客家本地 conflict in 1855-60 to 1867, that really impacted the Siyi area, especially Taishan. 500,000 people probably died during that time. And this was quite bloody between the Kejia and the Bendi. So many people think this is the reason why Chinese came to California. So the gold rush was, announcement of gold was actually 1849. And they found out about this very early on in China. And in 1849, we see Chinese coming to California already. Then we have this newspaper article in Alta, California, dated December 10th, 1849. This is the end of 49, the first year when the 49ers started coming here. About 25,000 49ers came and grew after that. But there's this article that says that there was a public meeting of the Chinese residents of this town, San Francisco, was held on the evening of Monday, November 19th at the Canton Restaurant on Jackson Street. And on this occasion, 300 Chinese met here and hired Salim Woodworth to be the representatives of the Chinese. So if the people that came from China were poor, starving, there was civil war, and they had to come, and they came here for gold, what were these 300 Chinese having a dinner at the Canton Restaurant on Jackson Street, hiring a white lawyer? Now, there were only about 700 Chinese in California at the end of 1849, according to Hubert Howe Bancroft, who wrote the history of early California. And from ship's records and so on, he says there's about 700 Chinese. So we have 40% of the Chinese meeting at this restaurant on Jackson Street to hire a white lawyer. So something's wrong here. Why aren't they up in the hills looking for gold? And why would they need a white lawyer? More than this, where did this Chinese restaurant come from that can seat at least 300 Chinese? This is a pretty big restaurant. California in 1849 had no lumber mill. You can't buy wood. No one was making furniture. No one was growing vegetables, nor raising pigs or chicken. So these Chinese that built this Canton restaurant must have come with money, with furniture, with cooks, with people growing vegetables. So they came with a plan. And by the way, there wasn't only one Chinese restaurant at the end of 1849. There were 3 to 4. So you have to think something is not right about what we say about why the Chinese came. Because this newspaper article will make it suspect that the Chinese are poor, illiterate, the first wave that came. By the way, most of them were in fact merchants from Zhongshan. The people from Siyi, the Seiyup people, didn't come until later on when California needed labor. So the first large group were mainly from Zhongshan, and they were mainly merchants. So we can tell these merchants had a lot of business. Why? Because the 49ers were supplied by China and Hong Kong. The reason was the East Coast, the nearest place in America that you can get food, you can get supplies, was East Coast. And to walk across the continent before the Transcontinental Railroad took 6 months, and you can't carry much. If you took a boat from New York, Boston, around the Horn, you get blown to Hawaii. The trade wind takes you to Hawaii. Then you have to tack back to California. That would be 5 months. Where's the nearest port you can get supplies? Hong Kong. Took 2 months. The speed record was 33 days. So you would find these cabins that the miners lived in. They were these knocked down like a IKEA kit that you put together these cabins, and they shipped them here, or otherwise the residents of San Francisco won't even have a place to stay. They got their sugar, their coffee, their flour, their butter from Hong Kong. And every time a ship came in from China, they would have an auction right at the pier because people can't wait to get hold of all these supplies that's coming from Hong Kong and China. So without China and Hong Kong, the 49er would have had a hard time supplying themselves. So the relationship between the West Coast and China started from day one. And the Chinese did not start their laundry business in America until 1851. The first laundry, Chinese hand laundry, was on Grant Avenue and Washington Street, but that wasn't until 1851. So between 1848 and 1851, this seems to be a crime that if you're a guy, a male, and you have to wash your own clothes, maybe you go to hell or something. I don't understand this, but none of the male will wash their clothes. So what did they do? The nearest port was Hong Kong or Canton. So they shipped their shirts to Canton and Hong Kong to wash. It took 4 months to come back, but it was cheap, $8 a dozen. In California, I think they were $2-3 a shirt if you can get someone to wash it for you. So they even needed Hong Kong and China to get their clothes washed. But starting right away by 1850, California passed the foreign miners tax, supposedly taxing all foreign miners $20 per month. That was a lot of money. Most people made $1 a day in 1849, 1850. So this was a whole 20 days wages just for the tax. And of course, the Chinese were really the only one they taxed because the Chinese stood out, looked different, had their queue, dressed differently. And so, and then the people collecting the taxes, they got a percentage, something like 20% of the monthly taxes they can collect. So they were very aggressive in collecting these taxes from the Chinese. And we know that from California income that in some years, the Chinese pay for about 40-50% of the California budget. So the Chinese not only helped build California in the earlier years, the Chinese funded 40–50% of the California budget. Of course, these were repealed later on, and they changed it, became illegal. Then they tried it again. Sometimes some district did this. So it went back and forth quite a bit. Then more damaging for the Chinese. Now, initially, the first year or two when the Chinese first came, the Chinese were welcome. But very soon, things turned around, especially by 1852 when Governor Bigler was elected. He was very anti-Chinese. And then by 1854, this was a very important case where People versus Hall, saying that Chinese are not allowed to be a witness in court because the Chinese were considered Mongolians. The concept was Mongolians were like the Native Americans, the Indians. And since Columbus was looking for India on his way and America blocked his way, so he put, or going to India and China. So the Indians should be the same as the Chinese. So this is the reason why People versus Hall is so important. So if you can't witness in court, you have no Chinaman's chance. That's where the term comes from. You have no, not even Chinaman's chance, meaning no chance at all. So now I go to the railroad. Now by 1863–64, Chinese were started to be brought in to do labor because California had a lot of work projects. So the picture on the left, we see quite a bit. This is the standard picture we show for the Golden Spike ceremony of May 10th, 1869, when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. A lot of things what we Chinese say about this event, I find not to be true. First of all, this is not the first transcontinental railroad connecting the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. This is the second. There was another transcontinental railroad completed about 9 years before this, and 700 Chinese were imported to build that one. That's the Panama Railroad, completed about 9 years before this was completed, I think 1854. And Chinese were imported to build that, and that's pretty well documented. So by this time, 1863–64, everyone knew Chinese could build the railroad. It didn't need Charles Crocker, to tell everyone the Chinese built the Great Wall, so we should try using the Chinese to build the Transcontinental Railroad. So the picture on the left, we most often say Chinese are missing in this picture. And some people say the Chinese were deliberately kept out of this picture. This is by Russell, A.J. Russell of the Union Pacific. He was the photographer for Union Pacific. But about 5–6 years ago, at Stanford University, they found these two Chinese here. You can see them here. One is covered and one is bending down. We can tell they're Chinese by their clothes. Now, in 1869, photography is not like today. It took about 3 to 5 second exposure time to take a picture, even outdoors. So the photographer probably shouted everybody stand still for 3 seconds to 5 seconds. So everybody understood that, but these Chinese probably didn't understand English. So one was bending down and another was twisting. So they're kind of out of focus. But we know this photo was posed after the ceremony, the Golden Spike ceremony. This was a pose picture. We know that because the trains are together. At the actual ceremony, the trains were kept apart because they had to put in the last 2 rail. And these 2 guys are not Leland Stanford and Thomas Durant. They are the engineers and not the head of the railroad. So here's at the actual ceremony. And the trains are apart because the Chinese put in the last 2 rails. And each rail is 28 feet. So 2 rails, they're at least 60 feet apart, but in reality, maybe 150 feet apart the trains were. And here are the Chinese. And in the back of this picture by Andrew Russell, he says, Chinese at laying last rail. So this is Chinese. There were 8 Chinese chosen to put in these last rail. So the Chinese were there. Now we have an article 5 days after the promontory summit, the Golden Spike ceremonies. And it says Mr. Strobridge, who was in charge of all the construction for the Central Pacific Railroad, when work was all over, this is after the ceremony, invited the Chinamen who had been brought over from Victory. Victory is the camp, name of the camp, the last camp before work was totally done. It was about 10 miles away from Promontory Summit. So they brought the Chinese over for this ceremony for the purpose to dine in his boarding car. So the 8 Chinese that were involved with the ceremony, James Strobridge, who was head of all the construction, brought the Chinese over to his personal car where they were entertained along with all the guests and officers present to cheer them, to thank them actually, and to toast them because James Strobridge said he couldn't have done this project without the Chinese. So the Chinese were recognized, at least by James Strobridge and by the VIPs that were there at Promontory Summit that day. And James Strobridge definitely said he couldn't have done this. So we have several articles saying this, that the Chinese that were there at the ceremony were in fact thanked. And here's a picture I saw, and the caption on the bottom before only states Chinese railroad workers. And look at these guys, they're 70, 80 years old. I said, how can these be railroad workers? Until later on, I found out this was in 1919 in Ogden, Utah, where they celebrated the 50th anniversary of the completion of the railroad. And they went out and looked for the 8 Chinese chosen to be at the ceremony. 50 years earlier, they found these 3. They transported them to Ogden, Utah, built a float, and put these Chinese on the float, saying the Chinese built the railroad. So America did not forget this at least 50 years after the ceremony, after the completion. So why did America pass the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 to not allow Chinese labor to come to America? Well, it starts off in 1870, soon after the completion the year before. They had a shoe strike at the Calvin Sampson's shoe factory in North Adams in Western Massachusetts. And Calvin Sampson heard the Chinese knew how to make shoes, and the Chinese did own a lot of shoe factories here in the West Coast. So he sent his manager to California, hire about 150 Chinese to go to North Adam to make shoes. And here is the first day when the Chinese arrived. He lined them up in front of his factory and took this picture. And he took a picture like that every year. He had the Chinese there doing this. Now, it was the town people's job to teach these Chinese English and prophesize them to become Christians. And the youngest that went to North Adam to work at this factory was a guy named Lu Gim Gong, picture up at top. He was about 15 years old. And Fanny Burlingame taught him English, adopted him. She lived in North Adams and converted him into Christian. And after he worked at the factory, he went to work with for Fanny. But he had tuberculosis. And so he had a lung problem. And Fanny says, well, she says, I own property at Florida. Why do you go to Florida and work on my property? And Lu Gim Gong went to Florida. But when he got there, he says, wow, this is just like Guangdong. Hot, humid. But how come you don't have oranges here in Florida? They said, well, we have early frost. The citrus, they don't do well with the early frost, and the soil's not good. So most orange trees don't survive here. So Lu Gim Gong started to graft because oranges come from China. His origin is from China, and he knew how to graft. So he came up with a Valencia orange that was juicy, sweet, and can survive the early frosts and the kind of soil they have in Florida. So the whole orange juice industry in Florida today is based on Lu Gim Gong, who went to the East Coast to do this. He was the first group. So then in the East Coast, they starting to hear Chinese are brought in to break up strikes, including the same year, 1870, Passaic Steam Laundry in Bellevue, New Jersey, imported about 150 Chinese there too. And this is the first time Chinese New Year 1871 was celebrated in the East Coast. And then by 1872, they had a strike at the Beaver Falls Cutlery, and they brought in about 200 Chinese. So in the East Coast, they are hearing that the Chinese are brought in to break up strikes. So pretty soon, the Chinese were looked upon not kindly. And so we have a lot of incidences where the Chinese were lynched, massacred, starting 1871, Los Angeles, 17 Chinese were lynched. The largest incidents where the most people were killed in a lynching was in Los Angeles, Chinatown, not in the South. Then Rock Spring in Wyoming, 28 Chinese killed, many wounded. And then Hell's Canyon in Eastern Oregon, 34 miners were killed. We know a lot about these massacres. People have done a lot of research on this. So we have Beth Lou Williams wrote this book, came out saying 169 towns and cities where Chinese were violently driven out, burned out, killed, pushed out. So today we have Asian hate and we want to stop it. But compared to what our ancestor had to live with, this is minor. It is it is bad, but compared to being driven out, killed, to be kicked out, it's less of an issue. Especially we have, what does it say, 11,000 plus incidents of hate crime, which is double in 2 years. Divided by 25 million Asian Americans, it doesn't even register. It's not good, but I think psychologically, it damaged the Asian community much more psychologically, because all the surveys tells us more than 50% of Asians have changed their lifestyle, afraid to take public transportation, go out at night, and so on. So as a mental health issue, being aware of this has been very harmful. And I'm not sure if anyone really know how to stop this. What do we do? It's just my opinion. So by 1882, the Chinese were excluded with the Chinese Exclusion Act. And most of my Chinese American friends and Asian friends says, this is terrible. What America did to us, so racist. And we are victims of this. Yes, we are, but the real story is the Chinese organized and pushed back. Between 1882 and 1905, Chinese Americans sued the federal government more than 10,000 times. There were only 105,000 Chinese in America when the Exclusion Act came about. So about 10% of the Chinese in America sued. This is incredible. If you think about it, what group does this? And about 30 of these cases, a little less than 30 of these cases went to the US Supreme Court, and the Chinese won many of these. And I'll talk about some of these going on. Now, why did the Chinese stop suing so much in 1905? There was a case called Ju Toi versus the US. And for this case, the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that we Chinese sue too much, that the courts are tied up with all these Chinese cases, and they can't handle so many cases. So they said, in 1905, they said, from now on, the Supreme Court will no longer have oversight on immigration cases because the Chinese sue too much. So they will, from now on, 1905, leave it up to the executive branch, the Labor Department and the Commerce Department to make the final judgment of whether someone can come in or not. The person interviewing that Chinese have the final say, and that's the executive branch. And that's why today the executive branch has so much power in immigration, because the Chinese lost this case. And maybe we should take up, hire some good lawyer and reverse this. So I'm going to talk about several important cases that the Chinese won. Right to a public education, equal protection under the law, civil disobedience, the largest incidents of long-term civil disobedience were Chinese Americans. We won for all Americans birthright citizenship, which is in the news today, but we also gave America the concept of political asylum, which is so important today in our southern border. The right of the accused, even the Miranda Act, is based on the Chinese case. And of course, bilingual education, the requirement to have bilingual education in the United States was a Chinese case. And I'll go through some of these now for you. First one is Tate versus Hurley, right to a public education. The Tate, Joseph Tate on the left, Mary Tate on the right. They were immigrants, but they were upper middle class. He had his own business. Both were Christians. Both spoke English. And as you can tell, he dressed and she dressed very Western. Joseph cut off his queue. And they even, Joseph even put in a telegraph wire between his home on Powell Street and his office on Grant Avenue. So he communicated with Mary via telegraph in the 1880s before the telephone came to San Francisco. So they're not normal people, they're very advanced. And they have white friends. And so when Mimi in the middle here was of age to go to school, they thought they'll take Mimi to the nearby public school. Mrs. Hurley, the principal, says, oh no, we don't let Orientals into our schools. So like all good Americans, the tape sued. They hired a lawyer and sued to try to get Mimi into the school. So they lost initially, but finally it went to the California Supreme Court. Now, Joseph and Mary, they hire a lawyer and they strategize. They said, we are immigrants, but we speak English. We are Christians. We are wealthy. We have American friends. So we are Americans except for the color of our skin. However, the California Supreme Court says, well, that doesn't matter. What matters is you pay your taxes, you pay your fees to California, and you don't break the laws of California, then you're under the jurisdiction of the state. If you're under the jurisdiction of the state, then you should get the benefit of the state, which includes a public education. So they won, not because of what they say that they act Americans, but because they have rights. But when they went back to Spring Valley School to try to get Mimi in, Mrs. Hurley says, does Mimi have her inoculation? Does she have her immunization shots yet? And they said no. So Mrs. Hurley, the principal, says, well, come back next year. In the interim, the Board of Education immediately after they lost this case built the Oriental School just for non-whites. So Separate but Equal started in San Francisco in 1885. And in the South, it didn't start until Plessy versus Ferguson in the mid-late 1890s. So even this separate but equal or segregated school started here in San Francisco with this case. But the Chinese won this, at least in California, and then it eventually applied to almost all the states. Next is equal protection under the law. Now, in the 14th Amendment, after the Civil War, to protect African Americans and the slaves, the blacks in the South, the 14th Amendment was passed by Congress. It has a clause, equal protection under the law. Now, everybody thought at the time it meant you have to write a law that's equal for everybody. So I talk about this. That's why it mentions me. Charles McLean is actually the professor at UC Berkeley that writes on most of these cases. And Nick Bartel does curriculum for the Association of Chinese Teachers. So we talked about this case. So what happened was 1882, Chinese can no longer come. At least the laborers could not come. But San Francisco, by 1885, the city fathers looked around and says, well, the Chinese can no longer come, but we have a problem here in San Francisco. About 15% of our populations are Chinese. So how can we get rid of the Chinese that are already here? And they said, well, the Chinese own a lot of laundries. why don't we pass a new law that all the people that own a laundry must get a permit from the city, and we will send the fire department to go in and make sure they know how to boil water safely, because if you have a laundry, you're boiling water all day, and San Francisco would burn down every 5-10 years because all the buildings are made out of wood and there's not much of a fire department. So this is a good law to protect the citizens of San Francisco. So 320 laundries immediately took out the permit. 100 got their permit, 220 were rejected. Well, maybe the 220 didn't know how to boil water safely. The problem was that the 100 that got their permit were all white and the 220 were Chinese. So the Chinese knew this was pure racism. And if you were Chinese, you won't get your permit. So they hired the best lawyer money could buy. Right away, the Chinese Six Company with the Chinese Laundry Association raised $20,000, equivalent to $500,000 today, and hired the best lawyer. And one brave soul, a guy named Li Yik, who owned Yik Wall Laundry, and he tested the law by operating the laundry without a license. So Hopkins, the sheriff, arrested him, put in jail, saw the judge. Li Yik got fined. He refused to pay, put back in jail. So this is a habeas corpus case. And so this eventually went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Chinese strategized with Hall McAllister, their lawyer, who was the founder of the California Bar Association. So this was a very influential lawyer. And so the Chinese, with Hall McAllister, look at the 14th Amendment and says equal protection under the law should mean not only does the law have to be equal, but the execution and the administration and the execution and administration of law also has to be equal. And people never thought about it this way, and the Chinese won. The Supreme Court agreed that the 14th Amendment also mean this. So this is a very important case, won in 1886, and the Supreme Court quoted this case more than 150 times during the civil rights movement to overturn many of the Jim Crow laws in the South. Now we come to civil disobedience. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 had to be amended every 10 years. It was only good for 10 years, so it had to be renewed every 10 years. So by 1892, they had to pass the Gary Act to renew this exclusion act for 10 more years, but it added another requirement. The Americans says, you Chinese all look the same. We can't tell. So from now on, every Chinese must carry a certificate of residency, as you see here on the left. You must have a picture and you must register with the government so we know you are legal. Well, the Chinese Six Company, or the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, 中华会馆, so told all the Chinese and told the Americans, in America, only dogs need to keep an identification with them all the time with their license. And only criminals needs to be registered with the government. And we Chinese are not dogs and we're not criminals. So why should we do this? So the Chinese Six Company told the 105 Chinese in America not to register, to practice civil disobedience. About 100,000 Chinese refused to do this, 97%, for 2 years. And the Six Company sued the federal government the Fong Yuting versus United States. But the sixth company lost this case and now have to register. So if you look at the certificate of residence that we still find in our museums and libraries, most of them are 1894 because the Chinese refused to register until April, May. The deadline was May 1894, and I'm looking at this one. It is 1894. So most of them you will find 1894, and if you find one 1892, they're very rare and they should be collectible. Next, we talk about Wong Kim Ark. This is birthright citizenship. Most of you are aware of this because Trump signed an executive order on day one to change this. But the Chinese with Wong Kim Ark in 1898 won the Supreme Court case. But the real story is that birthright citizenship was a concern for the Chinese much earlier. The first case I could find was a guy named Luk Tin Singh in 1884 in the California Court of Appeal, Ninth Circuit. He won there with a lawyer supplied by the Chinese sixth company, Thomas Reardon. So the community was already aware of birthright citizenship. Luk Tin Singh went to China for his education prior to 1882 Exclusion Act. When he came back in 1884, immigration says, we don't let in Chinese now. But he said, I left before this act and I'm born in Mendocino. So I am an American because of the 14th Amendment. And he had white witnesses. So he had to go to court and he won in 1884. Later on, 1888, another case, and the Chinese had to fight that and also went to the Court of Appeal. So when it came to Wong Kim Ark in 1895, when he was stopped, the Chinese were already very well aware of this. Now, he was a poor cook in his early 20s when he came back in 1895. But because the community organized, the sixth company backed him and raised the money, hired two of the best lawyers money could buy. Both were deputy attorney general for the United States. And one of them was a co-founder of the American Bar Association. So the Chinese again paid a lot of money for the best and kept appealing until went to the federal Supreme Court and finally won in 1898. So you think this is the end of the story for Wong Kim Ark. Here's a guy who has a Supreme Court case, a Supreme Court decision that says he is an American citizen. Well, by 1901, he went to Juarez, Mexico. When he tried to come back to America through El Paso in October 1901, he was stopped and says, we don't let in Chinese workers. You're just a cook. He says, but I'm an American citizen. I won the Supreme Court case in 1898, just 3 years earlier. They held him for 4 months, and they knew he won the Supreme Court case because the El Paso newspaper a week later says, this is the Wong Kim Ark that won the Supreme Court case in 1898, and they still hassled him. And this is discovered by Amanda Frost, Professor Amanda Frost at the University of Virginia, who is the really expert about this case. And then later on in 1910, Wong Kim Ark tried to bring his first son to the US. And by then we have the Angel Island just open. But his son could not pass the interrogation at Angel Island and was sent back. So even if you're a citizen, you have a right to bring your children here. He was rejected in 1910. So constant hassle. Then so he said, well, since they won't allow me to bring in my own son, I'm going to sell my slot. And he sold his slot for his third son to someone else, paper son. And when that son got in, then he brought his other sons here to America. So this is a constant struggle. And here we are again. This is coming up. So the message is really, it takes the community, it takes raising money, it takes organizations like United Chinese Americans to do this and watch it and to push back. So this is our history. We did bring about birthright citizenship and won this in the Supreme Court, but it's a constant fight. Now we have political asylum. Where did this concept come from? In 1916, Pancho Villa in Mexico crossed the border to New Mexico and killed a few Americans. Woodrow Wilson, the president, says, we can't let Mexico do this. So he got General John Pershing with 10,000 soldiers to go into Mexico to capture Pancho Villa. In 1916, it was the first time the U.S. sent large number of soldiers overseas to fight to another country. So it did not have a quartermaster corps. This is the group of people that takes care of the soldiers. So you have 10,000 soldiers, they're supposed to fight. So they needed to hire people to feed the soldiers, set up camp, move things around. So America, the military took out a ad in the paper in Mexico to hire people to work for the U.S. military to take care of the soldiers. Of course, the Mexican did not sign up because is a invading force. They don't want to help a invading force in Mexico. But the Chinese signed up. 1,000 Chinese signed up to help Pershing and the soldiers try to capture Pancho Villa. So a year later, World War I started in Europe. And since John Pershing was the best general Wilson had that have field experience, so he was recalled to America to go to Europe to fight. On his way back to America, he brought the Mexicans that helped him, the Americans that were in Mexico, because they would be massacred by the Mexicans in Mexico by then, and 700 Chinese that wanted to leave Mexico because they would be slaughtered also. So at the border, everybody crossed over except immigration says, well, the Chinese can't come in because we have the 1882 Exclusion Act. Pershing, to his credit, forced his way in with the 700 Chinese, but they were now illegal. So he had to put them under arm and guard and arm at Fort Sam Houston because they were now illegal immigrants. Pershing then went to fight World War I, and he became the hero. He won World War I. He was general for all the Allied armies. But when he came back to America, he found out the Chinese were still stuck at Fort Sam Houston, and the military was paying for their upkeep because they couldn't go out and work. So Pershing says, this is not right. People that help us, especially during time of war, we need to protect them. We need to take care of them. So he went to Congress in 1921 and got Congress to pass Public Law 29. This is the first time America ever considered political asylum, giving these Chinese certificate of residency. They can stay, but they couldn't be citizens. But this is the first time America passed a law allowing for birthright citizenship. And it's because of this that we do have this concept in America today. Miranda Act, everybody think is 1966, Miranda Supreme Court case. But if you look at the case, Supreme Court based it on the Zhang Songwan versus the United States Supreme Court case that was won by the Chinese in 1929. It was a 1919 murder case in Washington, D.C. The two accused Chinese, they caught them in New York without a warrant, brought them back to Washington, D.C. to interrogate them, denied them a lawyer, denied them sleep, denied them food, denied them medicine. So they confessed. But when it came to trial, they said, oh no, we didn't do it. We confessed because we were tortured. And of course, the Supreme Court says, well, the police can't do this to get a confession. So threw it out. The problem was this is a Washington, D.C. case. Washington, D.C. is only a federal jurisdiction managed by the federal government. So when Miranda came up, they just made it applicable to all America. So it applicable to state, county, and municipality. That's all the Supreme Court case did. Basically, it's based on this Chinese case that you can read by Scott Seligman called The Third Degree. So even Miranda Act, we can thank the Chinese for doing this. Then lastly, I want to talk about Lau versus Nichols, the requirement for bilingual education. With the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, all of a sudden we have a large migration of immigration of Chinese to America. It jumped from 105 a year to 20,000 a year. That took effect in 1968. So all of a sudden, San Francisco had all these Chinese students in the school, and they were teaching only in English. So the students that did not understand English being taught science, math, history in English, they didn't understand. So the parents complained. They said, our kids are not learning because it's all taught in English. And they're skipping school, and they'll lose 2 years of education until they learn English. So they approached the San Francisco Board of Education. The Board of Education says, well, we don't have the money to do this, and we don't have to do this. So the parents sued the San Francisco Board of Education. It took until 1974, and the Chinese won in this Lau versus Nichols. So from now on, if you have enough students in your community that do not speak English, they have to provide, that's enough students for a class, then the school district would have to provide lessons taught in their country of origin, the language, until a year or two later when the students have enough English to be put into regular classes. So when you think about all these things that the Chinese court cases did, right to a public education, equal protection under the law, which is the core of American civil rights, birthright citizenship, the concept of political asylum, the Miranda Act, bilingual education. This is not a one-off where individual did this. The community raised the money, hired a lawyer to make all this happen. It was deliberate. The 105,000 Chinese we had here were not quiet. I'm very proud of this history. I'm proud to tell my child and my grandchild, which I just recently had. I think this is something we should tell our children. And it's something we don't know well enough, and we don't talk about. We still talk about the railroad, that we built the railroad. But for me, this is so much more important that we should start letting our children know, to give them pride in what their ancestor did, and copy what our ancestor did today to push back against racist law, unfair law, to give all Americans social justice. So, 谢谢, thank you. And I'll stop sharing now.
Thanks, David. Let's have some question and answer. I see the first hand up by Gigi.
Oh, no, I'm actually giving applause.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful presentation.
It's amazing, right?
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, David. I know
Good seeing you, Gigi.
it's lovely to see you all the way from Spokane, Washington.
Yes.
When I learned American history, no, I didn't hear any of this. So thank you for sharing this.
All right, I see a hand by Norman. Norman Fong.
Yes. Reverend Norman Fong, a fan of
Hi, Reverend.
David Lay. I guess my question is more multiculturally. Do people know how we've contributed? Because I get sometimes a backlash on, we should be thankful for the South and the civil rights movement. And I love it. And I've been arrested for Dr. King and I've done all that. But I feel like it's a new day and we have an extra contribution to deal with Trump today. What do you say, David?
Yes, this history is actually public. You don't have to believe me. You can go and look up all these cases and more on the internet. We just have to tell our stories. This has been known, maybe 1-2 cases, but very few people put it all together to say this is not an individual effort. This was a community effort. And it was community that raised the money. Not one person can individually do all this, but we should be very proud that our community, although it's very small, only about 100,000 people, did all this. And so groups like United Chinese American, OCA, and all these others, that's what it is about. It takes a community to strategize and raise the money, hire the best lawyers, to be aware of this, to win social justice for everybody. Thank you, Norman.
Amen, bro.
Li Ying. I see a hand by.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for presenting this. There must be a research that you have done to organize the whole slides. I wonder if you or anybody who involved in organizing this consider writing a book, organizing the materials into writing a book for adults, and also if there's an opportunity, maybe have a kids version too.
Yeah, yes, I've been asked to write the books. Number one, they've all been written. If you look up Charles McLean, he has many books out there already, and he's the guru. And there's another Professor Kim, who's now retired in Seattle. And there's another one, Saylor, Syler, I believe. I forgot her first name, who writes about this. So Saylor. And so it's been written, but I don't think we have to think about distribution. That's why I'm so glad about United Chinese American give me this platform to talk about it, where now we have more than 200 people listen to me today, and hopefully you can tell your children, your grandchildren, and other people. I'm always available to give this talk, and I think this is better than writing the book because this is public information. Our court cases, we should go on TikTok. Maybe UCA should do TikTok. And just, 1 minute thing with each case. I think it's the delivery system is more important than the knowledge today.
Yes, we have AI, we have all the tools. It's going to be quick to make a video to,
Yes.
and there's like strategies and people to promote it. to everybody, like this is the history of Chinese contributing to the civil activities, even though it's
Yes.
it kind of very in the
Yes.
but yeah, it is
So
very
yeah, for
educational and
today, now we have more than 20 states requiring Asian American studies before their students graduate from the 12th grade. I don't know what Trump will do with this, but right now is the states have these on their books. But the question is, what are they going to teach? What's the education? Are we going to go back to the internment camps, building of the railroad? I think this is so much more important. And teachers are too busy to learn the curriculum and use. I think the delivery system is very important for me. I think we need to zoom into classrooms, have volunteer teachers made available, maybe retired teachers, write the curriculum and zoom into classrooms all over the US to talk about these contributions, how we change America for the better from the very beginning. These stories, even we don't read them. We Chinese Americans, even we are unaware of it. And, you know, every time I talk about this, everybody is surprised, and we shouldn't be. We should be very proud of this. And I know UCA, we're going to meet in April in San Francisco to really talk about this. What should we be talking about? What are we proud of? So it's very important on the distribution, how we do this.
Okay. Next, Gregory, please.
Yeah, David, nice to see you again. I know
Yes.
you're going to be speaking at my church in May, April, June, and we'll figure that out. But has anyone approached you? You know, in the Asian American community these days, we have a lot of filmmakers. They're in their 30s, 40s, some in their 50s, but we have a lot of them. And to create films that they can put on TikTok, they can put streaming videos. Has anybody approached you, and has anybody thought about investing in how to put these stories delivering them in that way, but delivering them not with talking heads, but with actual actors putting these stories together?
Yes, Rick Burns, this is Ken Burns' brother, along with Center for Asian American Media. This is CAM here in San Francisco.
Right.
We worked together about 7-8 years ago, called the Chinese Exclusion Act. It was a 2-hour film.
Yeah, it was too long, David. It was really too long.
The first one, the original, was 3 hours and 20 minutes, and they cut it down to 2 hours for PBS. 2 million people saw it, but it cost $2 million to produce. Filmmaking is quite expensive nowadays. And if you don't get it on PBS, you go to the film festivals. If you are the opening film, you might get 1,000 people to watch it. Otherwise, you get 100, 200 people to watch it. So the distribution would not work for the dollar you spend. So I really think we have to go to social media or zoom in for classrooms, because $1 per eyeballs is very expensive. You might do well if you have a narrative film, but how many films actually make it? You know, today to do a narrative film, you're talking $20 to $100 billion. And, you know, unless it makes it like Crazy Rich Asian, it's not going to work. And will people come and see a documentary? Unless you put it into just bits and pieces into a very exciting film. So
I think it's a doable.
Yeah, but Gregory is the second reverend we have online, minister. And I see Harry Chuck is here. So I see 3 ministers. So the churches might have a lot of interest in this.
Wow. Well, we can talk about that in April, as you said, David. So next is Bing. My friend Bing.
Hi. Thank you very much, Professor Lee. And I learned a lot today because, as I mean, some of us have said, we ourselves don't even know a lot of that stories, and how can expect others to know, right? So it's how to let people know about it is so important. And I think about because it's a good thing that over 20 states now require ethnic studies, including Asian American studies. And now here I live in Los Angeles. So my daughter's school district, Los Angeles Unified School District, it requires ethnic studies, and that includes Asian American studies. Now, because what I'm saying is, the curriculum is so important, right? What is included in that? So things like these cases are so important, even more important than the railroad story. So how do we make sure that these things are included? Who is on that committee of drafting that, curriculum? So we make sure we have our experts we need to make sure we have the experts, being part of that drafting committee of the curriculum in every state. Then the story can be included in the textbooks. I think that will have a profound impact on our next generation, right? Because they have to learn it. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. The problem is school districts are done by districts. Every district controls their lesson plans, and every state. Well, state has some, but every school district control the textbooks they use and the curriculum they use. Now, the Association of Chinese Teachers here in San Francisco, they've been around for almost 50 years. They have a lot of curriculum, a lot of them written by this person named Nick Bartel. And I asked them, how many teachers come and ask for these curriculum? And they said maybe 10, 20 at the most. How many actually use them? They don't know. But that's 10 to 20 a year. That's all. They've always been available. The Center for Asian American Media, we did curriculum for the Chinese Exclusion Act film. We spent $200,000 with the Oakland School District to write it. Almost no one go in and use that curriculum. I know curriculum, just doing the curriculum will not work. We have to have the delivery system, make it very easy for teachers to use. But maybe the Chinese school teachers who are here, instead of teaching just a history of China, teach some of these. I think the American-born Chinese kids here will be very proud to know this. I think, is their identity, because sometimes they look around and say, what was there to be proud of? But I think we are so much part of America, the law, because we were the first one to be picked on. So we were the first one to push back. But we just don't talk about it. I don't know why. After 50 years of Asian American studies at our universities, no one really come out and talk about what we did to change America. And we did it on our own. We pay for the lawyers. We strategize. Some of us went to jail. It's the whole gamut we did. So it's something I want to bring up, point out, and I think UCA can do this very well. Just you start telling your friends and people, your school district, teachers you meet, that they should look into this, that this is the story that should come to the fore when people ask you, what did the Chinese contribute to America? This is much, much better than just building the railroad, although that's important. But still, this, I think, for me, is the core of what we did.
Exactly. So another point I want to make is that in terms of the community, the power of community, you think about those people in 1890s, 1880s, right? We thought, okay, those are poor people, they don't have money. But they have those 6 companies, Zhonghua Huiguan, and they're supporting them. like in today's dollars, you mentioned like sometimes $500,000 supporting them. And today we have so many, I mean, in terms of financial ability, it's like 1,000 times better than that time, right? So I mean, how to really, I mean, we think about it.
Well,
we need to really, this is a critical time when the president is challenging the birth rate, citizenship, and the Wang Kim case will be brought up.
Yes,
right?
and land rights, and also the China initiative against the scientists, professionals. I mean, all that the community has to back, and it has, but not as much as I would like to see. But the first half of my talk is the narrative we have of what kind of Chinese came. That's been wrong in my mind from the very beginning, because most of these narratives are written by non-Chinese. All these books that talk about us being poor, laborers, we were starving, illiterate, we came. But from the articles I pulled out, the original documentation, these aren't poor people. There's a guy named James O'Mara, who was a journalist in San Francisco at the time. He said he didn't meet a single Chinese that didn't know how to read and write. If you read Mark Twain, he also said the same thing. He said he never met a Chinese that could not read or write. Most of them have survival level of Chinese, because all you need is 3-4 years of Chinese school and you can do it. And they had to write letters back and forth. And many of them were merchants that can do the writing. So the narrative is wrong. From the very beginning, we need to start writing our own book, tell our own stories from the documents we can find. Because I think the Americans and the non-Chinese, they don't have enough depth in our culture, knowledge of Chinese history, of why people come. And, you know, it's just all wrong. But we need to start talking, telling our own stories. That's why I would really hope that this would be a good platform to start this.
Thank you very much.
There's a long line of questions, so everybody be attentive to time. The next one is Diana. Diana?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Ding Ding TV.
Yes, of course.
David, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, we remember each other. Thank you so much for the presentation and what you're talking about. And, you know, we realize it is more important than ever for us to tell our stories. So we started Asian American Stories video contest 2 years ago. And this last year we had 72 entries. And with the theme, all of us belong here. And this year our theme is My Gift to America. You can see those are some of the entries. Yes. Which is a short story, quite amazing stories about our contributions to civic engagement, about the business, community, culture, everything. So I want to thank Taipei for supporting us last year, the trip to our winners to Washington, D.C. And we just got interviewed by ABC, and ABC become our media sponsor for supporting us telling Asian American stories. And we're going to have an award ceremony, which is on May the 1st. And I really want to invite everybody to join us. And I think it's important for us to work together. And also, David, when you come to San Francisco, I would like to meet with you and hear your advice on how to bring this to next level and reach to more people. And because we work with filmmakers. In the last 3 years, we work with a Hollywood filmmaker to produce the movie, The Builders of Silicon Dream. It's aired on PBS, aired on ABC, AMC, the theater. So, yes. But you know, this kind of production is very expensive, like what you said. So I realized it's really important to inspire more people, content creators, filmmakers, just create short videos. We also provide the grant for them to expand their stories. Okay. So we've been doing this, yeah, for a few years. Focus on.
I'll email you to connect.
Yeah.
Oh, when did you do that?
I will. After this, I'll send you an email.
Yeah.
Oh, please. You have my email, right?
I think I do. If not, I'll go through Jerry Wong.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You can
Jerry,
through
yes.
me. Joe Wang, not Jerry Wang. Yeah, Joe Wang.
Joe Wang and Jerry Wang, both of them, and they are our co-chairs. Yeah, let's connect after this. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Haipei.
Thanks, Diana. Thank you. Thank you for being in TV. So Liu Haihao, are you a college student?
Am I a what?
No, actually.
Okay, a college student or?
No, a little bit older than that. But
Okay.
Might be one of the younger attendees. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to David and like all the other attendees. You know, this is the first I've heard of this, and I had a similar experience in college when I was in college, where I first learned about Vincent Chin, which even now I think still a lot of people have never heard that story. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that I've come, I was close to a lot of the things that have been happening. So when I was at MIT, that was when Professor Chen Gang, right, was like placed under house arrest or investigated and all that.
Yeah.
And anyway, so the work I do now is sort of at the intersection of AI and policy and education. I went to Harvard after for a Master of Education, and I just wanted to ask, like, what can the younger generation do? When I was at MIT, I also went on an advocacy trip to DC, right? I think, I always felt very strongly, right, in the power of, making use of our ability in this country to speak directly to lawmakers, to policymakers. That's a privilege that a lot of people around the world don't get. So, but yeah, I just wanted to thank you again, and any other advice.
Quickly, Haihao, where are you based now?
I've been all over. I'm in London at the moment.
Okay.
But I was in Boston from like 2018 to 2022. Then I was back in Hong Kong, where my family is, for the past 2 years, and then just last week I arrived in London.
Contact me afterwards if you can find the UCA anywhere.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, I'm wearing Andrew Yang's shirt. If people.
Yeah, I saw that. The map. Yeah. Right.
Just by chance.
Yeah, David, that's back to you. Yeah. If you okay, then maybe Zhang Yubo.
Yes. My name is Yubo Zhang. I live in Virginia, and I am a working mom of 2 school-aged children. I actually work for Fairfax County Public Schools and also know Wesley for the adoptee community. I serve on a couple of public positions just to serve the community, to be part of a bigger group. I thank you so much for the presentation and organizing. What I do want to make 3 points. First of all, I do completely agree. A lot of narratives need to be more positive. Our children don't see ourselves in American history. Chinese American history is American history. And we so many times only focus on the negative. We're excluded, we're this and that, just reinforce a lot of negative feelings. But let's focus a little bit on the positive side. What have we done? We've done numerous things. My second grader, when my kids was young, brought home famous Americans in United States. We see no representation of Asian American. I was wondering, so really, for these years, we've done nothing that need to be recorded, written, and tell the next generation. With that, when my second child in the 5th grade, I start to see, well, her teacher actually more open-minded. She started to have some resources point to students. Then we see diversity. So I so appreciate that. There are a lot of it, Michelle, the ice skating, figure.
Do you have a question? Do you have a question there? Because we're running out of time.
Yeah, we
or
do.
You can contact me afterwards, or Taipei, and we can talk directly.
Totally.
Okay.
My point is that bottom-up approach not working, as you said. Have we considered a top-down, where through legislators from all states, where now 2 states already passed the bills that required the teaching curriculum of Asian American history to be included in the public school curriculum?
I think just the legislation won't do any good, because they don't have enough teachers there that are qualified to teach Asian American studies or ethnic studies. Even California, we don't have enough. So my only answer for that is to Zoom. We have technology that can do that. We have plenty of positive stories and individuals. MoCA, New York, Museum of Chinese in America, New York, their exhibit has a lot. And here in the West Coast, Chinese Historical Society of America, we have a lot. But you can contact me afterwards, email or call.
Yeah, I would like to have like a database where we can see all these great stories. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. So Gigi, do you have a question?
Yes, I actually do.
Okay. Let's do that quickly. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. My experience here in the Spokane area is that the young Asian Americans who are trying to affect political change they didn't know anything about the Chinese Exclusion Act, etc. And so how can you reach out to other political groups? It's the Spokane chapter of APIC, Asian Pacific Islander. And we had our first Lunar New Year Day parade after 70 years here in Spokane 2 years ago. So I'm not the person to say, here, you should find out about your own history. I think maybe a reach out from you guys would be probably more effective. So that's my question.
Yeah, it's not easy, one step at a time, only 24 hours in the day. So yeah, Gigi, if you want to learn tango, you go and
Argentine
she and
tango.
we go back a long ways in ethnic dance. But yeah, it takes, but you don't have to be Chinese to talk about these laws, because it's American history. So,
and all of this came about because I was a school teacher, so I am hearing your conversation and questions about the California state curriculum standards and frameworks. Yes. And so there's one for every single state in the United States. You can look them up online and you can see by grade level the main topics that should be taught according to the state, and then the different districts apply the state standards to their own specific district needs. So do find out about that. But I was taking the workshops as a middle school art teacher at the Asian Art Museum. Wonderful workshops. Moved here to Spokane with a big box of curriculum. What do I do with this beautiful curriculum? I contacted David and he said, oof, this one's tough. So I did finally find the political action committee instead of an education-based committee that would get this Asian curriculum out to the schools. So
okay, thank you, Gigi.
All right, well, we're finishing up very quickly in a few more minutes. I have Anna. Please. Anna, you need to unmute. Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Anna Ng. David knows me very well. I would like to talk about the curriculum and things like that. I mean, I'm a university professor. I teach at UC Berkeley and San Francisco State. And, the university students do get some element of this. We fought for ethnic studies starting even, in the 60s, and even in my generation in 79, we staged hunger strikes to get these things onto the curriculum. So the university does work towards that, but of course it's more progressive in states like California, New York, in the larger states that have larger Asian populations to get these ethnic studies programs. In California, we have been working towards the state curriculums to put these into. California did pass the high school curriculum to make this ethnic studies a requirement. And we've had university faculty working on the state standards to make them as part of the curriculum. Difficulty is that as part of Asian American studies, or as part of Chinese American studies within the context of Asian American studies, once you have to start including all these many different groups, as well as ethnic studies, by the time, the students' curriculum, they're basically reduced down to 1 week, 1 day, 1 paragraph again. And so we have this kind of difficulty in really trying to fit in terms of time for student curriculum. But one of the difficulties that I find is that this education also really, I think a forum like this is really valuable because oftentimes it's the public. It's actually the general public who actually has less of this information or less access to these information, and also potentially also new immigrants that hear less about these histories and how our contemporary public policy is connected to many of these things. Right now, with this push against quote unquote DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's tremendous challenges right now that the administration is placing on university curriculums, programs that are actually pushing back against us, the advances we've already made to put these things into the curriculum. We worked for years to put the California curriculum into the high school, and this coming down, these recent things with budget cuts and all of these things that are being staged as budget cuts is directly impacting,
Yes.
our efforts.
Anna, do you have a question?
But no, I don't. I'm actually just sort of answering some other people's questions. All right. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is I think the forums here would be really important for us to share, like David's talk. If it's recorded, everyone here should share this with your friends, to basically just share the recordings. And we could, 200 people are on this thing. If you each shared it with another 10, 20, 50 people, who then we can actually spread these stories out and fan it out on the social media in much more effective ways. And the other thing what I want to say is it's really important for us to politically in the current moment to be pushing back against the governmental efforts that are really trying to silence many of these efforts that have already been that we are doing and that we should be aware of. Some of the things that David's talking about, lack of access to that we're not telling the stories from our perspective, is the inability to actually access our own sources. This is a really a critical issue. I mean, with the current government policy right now, there are efforts to shut down the National Archives, which have many of our records that talk about the experiences of the Chinese for the last 100, 150 years. The potential destruction of those sources will actually destroy the ability to even research and write those histories and such.
And we need to cut you off.
To basically
Anna, we need to cut you off.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Next one is Casey Meyer. If you can introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Casey Meyer. I'm actually in Louisiana. I'm with an organization called Dialogue on Race Louisiana, where we talk about issues like this, and it's exactly like everything you've said as far as like the narrative and the history that's unknown. And also my children go to Mandarin immersion school. So in Louisiana, we don't have a big population of Chinese here. And so it is kind of amazing to be in this bubble, but I guess my question is, yes, is this recording going to be available so I can,
yes,
take back to my organization? Yes, and that's great. And also, it's like where I am in a state, it's even more hostile, right? The policies and what can be actually taught in schools, like it's actively being suppressed, if you will. So it's like, are there ways we can do this that might have to be outside of the educational system, in bites that can be maybe like given to parents and things like that, for them to have to self-educate the children. And do you guys find it valuable for organizations that talk about, race and giving people the language and a toolkit to be able to convey it more effectively? And do you see value in dialogue among people in organizations?
Yes, I'm always available to Zoom in if you want to get a group together.
Yes.
I can talk on this and other subjects that's related. So yeah, just contact me. I'm
Wonderful.
more than happy to be involved.
And Casey, where are you based in Louisiana?
I'm in Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge. Okay, actually,
Yes.
I have some network there. Maybe you should contact with me too. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
right.
Send me an email or send UCA an email. They'll connect me with you. So if you get a group, Zoom is so good, so easy. I can be anywhere. And this just takes an hour and a half of my time. So it's easy.
Okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much. Yes. And maybe if I could connect you with the CEO of Dialogue on Race Louisiana, we have developed a curriculum, not a presentation, about the history of race in the United States and how we got to where we are. And if we could work on tailoring a Chinese American version, I think that would be really powerful.
What is the group you mentioned? Council on the Race or something?
It's called Dialogue on Race Louisiana.
Dialogue on Race in Louisiana.
Dialogue on Race Louisiana.
Okay.
DORLA.
Okay.
And we focus on institutional racism. And this is like exactly the things that we talk about, history and law. And it would be great if we can,
All right.
be in touch. Yes, thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Casey. The last one here is Li-Ying. Are you still having a question or?
The question is, how do we contact you through email?
Oh, well.
Okay.
Dave,
That's
my
one question.
email
Can you
is-
put that?
Let me
Yeah,
put
my
it
email is David at that's DAVID at Lei Family, LEI family.com. And let me see here.
Yeah, in the chat, I can easily copy paste if you can send it to the chat.
Well, here it
you.
is. It's on the bottom of my last slide.
Oh, got it. Yeah, I can
Okay,
just screenshot.
David
Thank
at
you very
Lei
much.
Family. Yeah.
And for that matter, any of you who want to contact UCA, you can just write info@ucausa.org. You can tell us that you were part of this webinar, and whatever your request is or questions, we will deal with that every day. We'll respond to you very quickly on that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's wrap up this here, and we are exactly 10 minutes after 1 hour. Pretty good. And as you can see that David has such an amazing way to tell the story that we are all touched on that. And I think I'm also while you all are talking, I'm thinking a lot that we can do together. We will send every single one of you an email and with a copy of today's program and with the contact information. And I want to raise some issues with you to see those questions that you have raised. Maybe there's some way that we can find a good way moving forward that has not been addressed before. So again, please, we're looking forward to our emails to you, and we would like to have your continued response and the communication and discussion. And if you all want, we can have just a session to discuss all these ideas again. So thank you for the great evening, and thanks, David, and thanks our team, and we should do more of this. Thank you so very much.